The bell above the glass door gave its tired little jingle, half cheer, half warning, as the morning drifted into the cafe. Inside, the place looked like every other artisanal spot that had sprouted up in the last few years. Pale wood tables, hanging plants that were always slightly too dusty, chalkboard menus with a dozen fonts, and a glass case full of pastries that cost more than a full meal used to. Outside, winter had left its fingerprints on everything. A gray sky, a damp wind, and sidewalks slick with yesterday's melt. People hurried past with their collars up, eyes down, earbuds in. But the man at the corner bench didn't hurry anywhere. He sat under the cafe's narrow awning where the wind softened just enough to make the cold tolerable. He was old in the way the body tells the truth, even if the face tries to smile through it. His coat was too thin for the season, the elbows shiny with wear. His hands, big and careful, rested on a battered cane as if it were a friend. A knit cap pulled low over silver hair did little against the damp. His name was George Carter. Most people didn't know that. Most people knew him as that guy. The regulars knew him as a quiet presence. Someone who stared into the middle distance like he was watching a movie only he could see. Someone who nodded at dogs and sometimes said, "Good morning," in a voice that carried an old gentleness. The newer customers didn't know what to do with him. Some handed him coins without meeting his eyes. Some avoided the bench entirely, as if misfortune could be contagious. And inside the cafe, behind the counter and the polished espresso machine, the employees had built their own little world, complete with its own rules about who counted. It was a slow morning. A few laptops clicked. A woman in a wool coat spoke softly into her phone. The grinder word then stopped. Tyler, who had been hired 3 weeks earlier and already acted like he owned the place, leaned against the counter with a bored expression. He was tall, all sharp elbows and a swagger he wore like cologne. Beside him, Madison rolled her eyes while scrolling on her phone, her nails tapping the screen like impatience made audible. And then there was Chris, the shift lead, older than the others by a few years, the kind of person who should have been mature enough to stop foolishness, but instead had learned how to make it look like team bonding. Chris stared out the window toward the bench, watched George adjust his coat, and tuck his chin down into it. "He's back," Tyler said, as if announcing bad weather. Madison didn't look up. "He's always back." Chris shrugged, not hurting anyone. Tyler's lips twisted. "He makes it look grimy." The word landed wrong in the air, even if no one called it out. Madison made a face like Tyler had said something mildly annoying, not something revealing. "Just ignore him," she muttered. "We're not a shelter." Tyler's eyes flicked to the cooler beneath the counter, where bottled sodas sat in neat rows. Fizzy drinks with bright labels, cold enough to sting a hand. His grin came slow, like a thought sinking teeth into him. "Hey," he said, "I bet we could get him to move." Chris's brows lifted. "What are you thinking?" Tyler glanced around. There were no managers in sight. The owner was never around in the mornings anymore. And the cameras, well, the cameras were there, but Tyler had noticed they didn't cover the bench outside. Only the interior, and even then, the angles were questionable. He reached down and pulled out a soda, dark bottle, condensation beating on the plastic. Madison looked up, interest sparking. "Don't." Tyler's grin widened. "Relax. It's just a prank." Chris hesitated, but that hesitation wasn't refusal. It was calculation. The kind of pause people take when they want to do something, but also want to believe they're still a good person. "What kind of prank?" Chris asked, though he already knew. Tyler shook the bottle lightly. Bubbles rattled inside like a trapped storm. "We toss it near him. Like, oops. Maybe it splashes his shoes. He gets annoyed, leaves. No big deal." Madison's mouth pulled into something between a smirk and a wince. "That's mean." "It's soda," Tyler said. "Not acid." Chris exhaled, glancing toward the seating area. Customers sat scattered, not paying attention. No one was watching. "Don't hit him," Chris said, like that was the line where decency began. Tyler gave a mock salute. "Yes, sir." Madison's voice sharpened. "You're going to get us in trouble." Tyler shrugged. "Or we'll have a nice bench again." Chris leaned in, lowering his voice. "Make it quick, and if anyone asks, you slipped." Tyler's eyes flashed with satisfaction. That's what I like about you, man. Practical. Madison looked away, but she didn't stop him. Her fingers went back to her phone as if the screen could absolve her. Tyler stepped toward the door, soda in hand. He pushed it open with his shoulder. Cold air gusted inside, carrying the smell of wet concrete and exhaust. Tyler shivered theatrically, then stepped outside, letting the door swing closed behind him. George didn't notice at first. He was staring across the street at a bakery window, watching bread being stacked like treasure. Tyler approached with exaggerated casualness. He shook the bottle again, louder now. The fizz sounded like laughter. George turned his head slowly. His eyes, brown, tired, alert, settled on Tyler. Tyler stopped a few feet away. "Hey," he called, voice bright, fake friendly. George blinked, then nodded. "Morning." Tyler rolled the soda from hand to hand. "You can't sit here." George's gaze drifted toward the cafe sign, then back. "I'm not inside. Just keeping out the wind." Tyler's smile tightened. "You're scaring customers." George's shoulders rose and fell once, a small sigh. "I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just sitting." Tyler tilted his head. "You could sit somewhere else." George adjusted his cane. "This is public space." Tyler laughed, short and sharp. "Public space. You got a lot of opinions for someone without." He stopped himself, as if he'd almost said something that even he knew would sound too ugly out loud. His hand tightened around the soda bottle. George watched him carefully, like he'd watched many storms in his life, and knew when one was about to break. Tyler's grin snapped back into place. Anyway, he took one step closer, lifted the bottle, and in a quick, practiced motion, he pitched it, not at George's face, not directly at his body, but close enough that it might as well have been. The bottle hit the ground, bounced, and burst open with a pop so loud it made George flinch. Dark soda erupted like a fountain, splattering George's coat, his hands, his shoes. Cold, sticky liquid sprayed the bench, pooled at his feet. For a split second, there was silence. George looked down at himself. His coat glistened with wetness. His hands trembled slightly, not from age this time, but from shock. Tyler snorted. "Oops." George stared at the soda, dripping from his sleeves. Then he looked up, slowly. His eyes were steady, but something inside them had cracked. "You did that on purpose," he said quietly. Tyler stepped back, spreading his hands. "What?" "No. Slipped. You should move, though. It's messy." George's jaw worked, as if he were chewing on words he didn't want to taste. "Why?" Tyler shrugged. "Because it's funny." George's voice stayed calm, but it carried weight now. "Funny to who?" Tyler laughed again, louder, glancing toward the window where Madison and Chris could be seen pretending not to watch. George turned his head slightly and saw them. Saw Madison's face half hidden behind her phone. Saw Chris's stiff posture, his eyes on the floor. George's breath left him in a slow, controlled stream. "All right," he said. He began to stand. It wasn't easy. His knees complained. His cane shifted, searching for balance on wet ground. Soda made the pavement slick. Tyler watched with a satisfied smirk, like he'd won. George rose fully. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't reach for Tyler. Instead, he bent down, slowly, painfully, and picked up the empty bottle. His fingers curled around it, sticky now. Then he looked at Tyler, and his voice was soft as a folded letter. "One day," George said, "you're going to be old and tired, and you'll need kindness more than you think." Tyler rolled his eyes. "Save it." George turned away, bottle in hand, and began to shuffle down the sidewalk, his coat dripping, his steps careful. Tyler stood there for a moment, pleased with himself, then pushed open the cafe door and stepped back inside, as if he'd simply taken out the trash. The bell jingled. Warmth wrapped around him. He grinned. Madison lifted her eyebrows. "You're an idiot." Tyler chuckled. "He's gone." Chris exhaled, his face tight. "Just clean the outside area. People will complain." Tyler tossed his hair back. "No one cares." And for a moment, it seemed like that might be true. Then the door opened again. The bell jingled, same sound as always, but this time it carried something else with it. A hush moved through the cafe the way wind moves through tall grass. Quiet, fast, inevitable. A man walked in wearing a charcoal coat and a look that didn't belong to someone stopping for a latte. He wasn't tall in a dramatic way, but he had a presence that made his height irrelevant. His hair was touched with gray at the temples, his face lined with a life lived under pressure. He scanned the room once, eyes sharp, taking everything in. Chris straightened instantly. Madison's phone dropped a little lower. Tyler's grin faltered. Because this wasn't a customer. This was the owner, Malcolm Hayes. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not on a Tuesday morning. Not unannounced. He usually came late afternoons, chatted with regulars, checked numbers, left a tip jar note about team spirit. But here he was, standing at the entrance like the world had shifted under him. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then his gaze went to the window. Outside, the bench was smeared with soda. The pavement shone wet and dark. A trail of sticky footprints glistened faintly where someone had walked away. Malcolm's face changed. The color drained just a shade, leaving something pale and stunned behind. He took one step forward, then another, slow, deliberate, as if approaching a scene he couldn't quite believe. Chris's voice cracked. "Mr. Hayes." Malcolm held up a hand without looking at him. His eyes stayed on the window. "Oh," Malcolm said, voice low. "Did that." Silence. The espresso machine hissed softly, oblivious. Tyler swallowed, suddenly aware that swagger had no purpose in the face of someone who could end his paycheck with a sentence. Tyler started. Madison looked at her shoes. Chris cleared his throat. It's just a mess outside. We were going to clean it." Malcolm turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto Chris like spotlight. "I didn't ask what you were going to do about the mess," Malcolm said. "I asked who did it." Chris's mouth opened, closed. Tyler, sensing an opening, tried to sound casual. "It was an accident. A bottle slipped." Malcolm's gaze shifted to Tyler. For a second, it was blank. Then something hardened. "An accident," Malcolm repeated. Tyler nodded too quickly. "Yeah, total accident." Malcolm took a breath through his nose, then walked past the counter without asking, heading toward the door. Chris hurried after him. "Mr. Hayes, please." Malcolm didn't stop. He pushed the door open and stepped outside. Cold air swallowed him. The sound of traffic, distant voices, and the damp hush of winter rushed in. He stared at the bench. He crouched, running his fingers along the sticky wood, then pulled his hand back, studying the dark residue on his skin. Then he stood again, turning in a slow circle, looking down the sidewalk. His eyes landed on George's retreating figure, small in the distance, moving with painful care. Malcolm's chest rose and fell once. He started walking. Inside, the staff watched through the window, tension tightening the room like a drawn wire. Tyler's voice came out thin. "He's just talking to him." Chris swallowed. "Shut up." Madison's eyes were wide now, fear making her look younger than she'd seemed minutes ago. "We're dead." Outside, Malcolm caught up to George quickly. He was brisk, long-striding, moving like someone accustomed to making decisions. "Sir," Malcolm called. George stopped, turning slowly, wary now. He lifted his cane slightly, as if it were both support and shield. Malcolm slowed, hands visible, posture careful. "Sir," he said again, softer. "I'm Malcolm Hayes. I own that café." George stared at him. "All right." Malcolm's throat moved as he swallowed. "I just walked in and saw what happened." George looked down at his wet coat, then back up. "You saw the soda." "Yes," Malcolm said, voice tight. "And he paused, the words sticking. "I'm sorry." George's expression didn't change much, but his eyes did. Something flickered there. Exhaustion, resignation, a pain that had long ago stopped being surprising. "It's not the first time," George said. Malcolm's stomach dropped at the simplicity of it. He glanced back toward the cafe, where the window framed 3 shapes frozen in place. "I need to make this right," Malcolm said. George's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but bitter. "People always say that." Malcolm nodded once, as if accepting the accusation. "You're right. Words aren't enough." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief. He offered it. George hesitated, then took it slowly. Malcolm's voice lowered. "Can I ask your name?" George stared at him a moment longer, then said, "George." "George," Malcolm repeated. "Okay." He looked at George's coat again, the way the soda clung to the fabric. The wet made it darker, heavier. Cold. Where are you headed? Malcolm asked. George's eyes narrowed. Why? Because, Malcolm said, I want to help. Not with a speech. With something real. But you don't have to trust me. You don't have to tell me anything. He stopped, exhaled. That bench is part of my business. Those employees represent me. What they did. I'm responsible for what happens under my sign. George shifted his weight carefully. I'm headed to the community center. They open at 10. Sometimes they have coffee. Sometimes they have a seat. Malcolm checked his watch. It's 9:20. George nodded. They don't let you in early. Rules. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Would you let me buy you breakfast somewhere warm? Not inside the cafe. Somewhere else, if you prefer. George studied him. You want to be seen doing something nice. Malcolm winced as if struck, because it was possible. It was possible that his instinct to fix this could turn into performance, even if he didn't intend it. I can't prove what's in my head, Malcolm said. All I can do is choose what I do next. If you say no, I'll respect it. If you say yes, I'll keep it simple. George's eyes searched Malcolm's face like he was reading fine print. Finally, George shrugged, small. I'm hungry. Malcolm nodded. Okay. He gestured gently toward a diner across the street. Nothing fancy. Just fluorescent lights and a sign that promised pancakes all day. They walked there together. George moved slowly. Malcolm matched his pace without making a show of it. Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and fried potatoes. A waitress raised an eyebrow at Malcolm's coat, then looked at George's wet sleeves and softened. They sat. Malcolm ordered without asking George to pick something cheap. He didn't do the awkward dance some people did. He simply said, 2 breakfasts. Whatever he wants. George asked for eggs, toast, sausage, and coffee. The waitress nodded and hurried off. For a moment, Malcolm didn't speak. He looked at his hands, then up at George. I'm going to deal with them, Malcolm said. George stirred sugar into his coffee slowly, though it hadn't arrived yet. The gesture was habit, a memory of sweetness. Ow! George asked. Malcolm's eyes tightened. They won't work there anymore. George's gaze lifted, steady. That's what you think fixes it. Malcolm swallowed. It's part of it. But you're right. It doesn't erase what happened. George's voice stayed even. People throw things. People say things. People laugh. They always have. Jobs come and go. I still walk around in my skin. The words weren't angry. They were tired. And that tiredness hit Malcolm harder than rage would have. Malcolm nodded slowly. Then tell me what would matter. If anything, George leaned back slightly, wincing at the stiffness in his back. You want to know what would matter? George said, being treated like a person when nobody's watching. Malcolm's throat tightened. George continued, voice low but firm. Not being looked at like I'm dirt. Not being joked about. Not being talked about like I'm some object taking up space. I don't need saving. I need respect. Malcolm listened, not interrupting. George's eyes drifted toward the window, toward the street, toward a world that often pretended it didn't see him. I used to have a house, George said quietly. A little one. Used to have a wife. Used to have a job driving buses. I wore a uniform. I had a name tag. Malcolm's chest tightened. George's fingers curled around the cane handle. Then things happened. Health. Bills. Grief. One bad year became 2. People stop calling. You end up sleeping in places you never imagined. And then everyone looks at you like you chose it because you're lazy. He looked back at Malcolm. That boy out there didn't see me. He saw a target. Malcolm's voice came out rough. I'm sorry. George shrugged again. Sorry doesn't dry my coat. The waitress arrived with coffee and water, setting it down gently. She looked between them, sensed the wait, and didn't ask questions. When the food came, George ate slowly but with purpose, like hunger had taught him not to waste. Malcolm barely touched his own plate. His mind kept replaying the soda, exploding, the sticky bench, the trail of footprints. He kept seeing George's face in that moment after it happened. How calm he'd been, and how much it must have cost him to be calm. When George finished, Malcolm paid, leaving an extra tip without calling attention to it. Outside, the cold had sharpened. George adjusted the handkerchief Malcolm had given him, dabbing at his sleeve. Malcolm gestured toward the community center. Can I walk you there? George hesitated, then nodded once. They walked. At the center's doors, still closed, George stopped. This is fine, he said. I'll wait. Malcolm looked at the locked entrance, then back at George, seeing how the wind cut through him. There's got to be somewhere you can go now, Malcolm said. George's eyes narrowed. And you're going to fix that too? Malcolm inhaled. Not alone, but maybe I can start something. George studied him again. You mean charity? I mean responsibility, Malcolm said. George's gaze flicked toward the cafe's direction. Then go take it. Malcolm nodded. I will. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. He offered it, then paused. Do you have a phone? He asked carefully, not assuming. George snorted softly. Not anymore. Malcolm nodded, adjusting. He turned the card over and wrote something, then handed it to George. On the back, Malcolm said, is my personal number. If you find a way to call, or if someone that can help you call, I'll answer. If you want to meet again, if you need something specific, if you just want to tell me to leave you alone, either way. George took the card, staring at it like it was a strange object. What? George asked again, quieter now. Malcolm's eyes were steady. Because I can't unsee what I saw. George looked at him for a long moment. Then he tucked the card into his coat carefully, like something fragile. All right, George said. Go. Malcolm turned back toward the cafe, jaw set. He walked faster now, anger rising. Not the hot kind that makes you shout, but the cold kind that makes you certain. When he entered the cafe again, the bell jingled and all heads snapped toward him. Chris stood behind the counter like a man waiting for judgment. Tyler hovered near the pastry case, trying to look casual, but his fingers fidgeted. Madison stood rigid, phone gone now, hands clasped like she was praying. Malcolm didn't waste time. Office, he said to Chris. Chris swallowed. Mr. Hayes. Now, Malcolm said. Chris moved quickly, leading Malcolm toward the back room. Small, cluttered with boxes and paperwork. Malcolm stopped at the threshold and turned, letting his gaze sweep over all three employees. Sit, he told Tyler and Madison. They obeyed, perching on crates like nervous children. Chris stood awkwardly. I can explain. Malcolm's voice stayed controlled. You're going to. Chris cleared his throat. It was Tyler's idea. I told him not to hit the man. He didn't. It was just a prank. Malcolm finished, eyes cold. Tyler forced a laugh. Yeah, it was a joke. He's always out there. Customers complain. Malcolm stared at Tyler. Do you know his name? Tyler blinked. What? Do you know his name? Malcolm repeated. Tyler's mouth opened, then closed. No. Malcolm nodded slowly. Of course you don't. Madison's voice came small. Mr. Hayes, I didn't throw it. Malcolm turned to her. Did you stop it? Madison's eyes filled with panic. I told him not to. Malcolm's voice remained even. And then what? Madison's shoulders sagged. Nothing. Chris tried again. We'll clean it. We'll apologize. It won't happen. It already happened. Malcolm snapped, the first crack in his restraint. He inhaled sharply, then lowered his voice again. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened because you all felt comfortable treating a human being like a prop. Tyler bristled. Come on. It's not that deep. The words hung in the air like smoke. Malcolm stared at Tyler as if seeing him for the first time. Not that deep. He leaned forward slightly. A black elderly man sitting quietly on a bench gets soda thrown at him by employees of my business. And you think it's not that deep? Tyler shifted, defensive. I didn't say. Malcolm cut him off. You don't have to say it. You acted it. Chris's face reddened. Mr. Hayes, I'm responsible. I should have stopped it. Yes, Malcolm said, turning to Chris. You should have. Chris looked down. I'm sorry. Malcolm's eyes moved to Madison. And you? Madison swallowed. I'm sorry too. Malcolm nodded once, then looked back at Tyler. And you? Tyler's jaw tightened. Sorry. It sounded like a dare. Malcolm stared at him a moment longer, then stood fully, voice firm. Tyler, Malcolm said, you're fired. Effective immediately. Hand me your apron and your key. Tyler's eyes widened. What? You can't. I can, Malcolm said. And I am. Tyler stood abruptly, knocking his knee against a crate. This is ridiculous. It was a prank. Malcolm's voice dropped, dangerous quiet. You assaulted someone. Tyler froze. Malcolm continued. You threw something at an elderly man. You drenched him in the cold. You laughed. That is not a prank. Tyler's face flushed. He's not. I mean, he's always. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. Finish that sentence. Tyler's mouth worked. Then he stopped, realizing there was no version of it that wouldn't reveal exactly who he was. Malcolm held out his hand. Apron. Key. Tyler hesitated, then yanked off his apron and threw it down. He dug in his pocket, slammed a key onto the table. You're going to regret this, Tyler spat. Malcolm didn't flinch. No, I'm going to regret ever hiring you. Tyler stormed out, bell jangling violently behind him. Malcolm turned to Chris. You're suspended. We'll talk after I review the footage and speak with HR. You will not work another shift until then. Chris's eyes went wide. Please, I need this job. Malcolm's voice softened just a fraction, but stayed firm. Then you should have acted like you needed it when you watched someone get humiliated outside. Chris's shoulders slumped. Yes, sir. Malcolm looked at Madison. You're not fired, but you will be on probation. One mistake, you're done. And you're going to attend every training session we bring in. No excuses. Madison nodded rapidly, tears spilling. Yes. Yes, I will. Malcolm exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Then he said, now we fix what we can. He walked out to the front counter, grabbed cleaning supplies, and went outside himself. He didn't delegate. He didn't ask anyone to do it. He scrubbed the bench and pavement with his own hands, the cold biting his fingers through the gloves. Customers watched through the window, whispering. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked impressed. Some looked away. Malcolm didn't care what they thought. He cared that George had walked away sticky and cold while people laughed. When the bench was as clean as it could be, Malcolm stood and stared down the street again. George was gone now, swallowed by the city. Malcolm went back inside and pulled up camera footage from the cafe's interior system. He watched the staff's body language, the way they'd looked out the window, the way they'd smiled. He saved it. He backed it up. He emailed it to himself and to HR. He wrote a report with timestamps. Then he closed the laptop, and for a moment he just sat in the back office, head in his hands. Because he knew something now that he hadn't wanted to know before. Cruelty didn't always come in loud, obvious monsters. Sometimes it came in bored employees on a slow morning. Sometimes it came in small laughs. Sometimes it came in the excuse that it wasn't that deep. And it came in a business owner who wasn't there to see it until it was too late. Malcolm stood again, straightening his coat. He called a meeting with the remaining staff on the next day off. Mandatory. Paid. He contacted a local community organization that worked with housing insecurity and asked for help designing training that wasn't just a slideshow no one listened to. He asked how he could support their work without making a publicity stunt. He drafted a policy, no harassment, no moving people along unless there was genuine danger, no touching anyone's belongings, no jokes at someone else's expense, immediate termination for violations. Then he did something he'd avoided for a long time because it felt complicated. He called the community center and asked to speak with someone in charge. He introduced himself. He told them what happened. He asked if George was there. The staff member on the phone hesitated. He comes by. Can you tell him I'm looking for him? Malcolm asked. Another pause. Why? Malcolm swallowed. To apologize properly. And to ask what would help. Not just him. Others too. Silence. Then the staff member said, you can come by and talk to our director. So Malcolm went, later that afternoon, carrying a bag, a warm coat, gloves, socks, and a thermos of coffee. Not as a savior. As a man, trying to be responsible. When he arrived, the community center was crowded. People sat in plastic chairs, some sleeping, some talking quietly. The air smelled like wet clothes and coffee and exhaustion. Malcolm's expensive coat suddenly felt ridiculous. He asked for the director, waited, then was guided to a small office. The director was a woman with kind eyes and a weary face, the kind of person who carried too many stories. She listened as Malcolm explained. When he finished, she sat back and studied him. You're not the first business owner to come in here feeling guilty, she said. Malcolm nodded. I'm sure. She tapped a pen against the desk. Most of them want to donate once, post a picture, and feel clean again. Malcolm's cheeks warmed. I don't want that. Then don't, she said simply. Do the hard part. Do the quiet part. Keep showing up. Malcolm nodded again. I want to find George. I want to tell him. She raised a hand. He might not want to see you. Malcolm swallowed. I understand. She looked at him, weighing. But I'll tell him you came. Malcolm exhaled. He left the bag with the director, asked her to give it to George if he wanted it. Then he sat in the waiting area, not for show, but because he didn't know what else to do. He watched people come and go. He watched someone argue about paperwork. He watched a volunteer hand out soup. He watched a man in a torn hoodie laugh with a woman holding a baby, and the laugh sounded like life refusing to be crushed. He sat there until the director approached him quietly. George is here, she said. Malcolm stood, heart thudding. The director pointed toward the far corner, where George sat with a cup of coffee, his coat still damp but now covered by a borrowed blanket. George looked up, eyes narrowing when he saw Malcolm. Malcolm approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. I'm not here to corner you, Malcolm said. If you want me to leave, I'll leave. George stared at him, then looked away briefly, as if deciding whether this was worth the effort. Finally, George said, sit. Malcolm sat on a plastic chair opposite him. George's gaze was steady. You fired him. Malcolm nodded. Yes, and suspended the shift lead, and put the other employee on probation. George's mouth twitched. That's something. It's not enough, Malcolm said. George took a sip of coffee. No, it's not. Malcolm nodded, accepting it. I'm changing policies, bringing in training, partnering with groups like this, setting up a fund quietly for immediate needs people have. Coffee, meals, socks, bus passes. I'm also putting a note on the cafe door. Anyone being harassed outside can come in and ask for help. No questions. George watched him, skeptical but listening. Malcolm continued, and I want to ask you, if you're willing, what I should do differently. Not to look good, to be better. George's eyes softened just a fraction, like something in Malcolm's tone had reached him. You want advice from a man you didn't know existed yesterday, George said. Malcolm nodded. Yes. George looked down at his hands, then at the cane, then back up. He spoke quietly. Start by learning names. Not just mine. Anyone you see out there regularly. You don't have to give them money. You don't have to fix their life. But when you learn someone's name, you stop treating them like scenery. Malcolm nodded, swallowing hard. George continued, and tell your staff that people aren't problems to move. They're not obstacles. They're not jokes. Tell them they're looking at someone's grandfather, someone's father, someone who had a job and a life and a home once. Malcolm's voice came rough. I will. George watched him for a long moment. Then he said, You froze when you walked in. Malcolm blinked. What? George's eyes held his. You froze because you didn't expect it, because it didn't fit your picture of your business. Malcolm's chest tightened. Yes. George nodded slowly. That freeze, keep it. Not the shock. The memory. The part that wakes you up. Malcolm nodded, eyes burning. George took another sip of coffee, then gestured toward the bag Malcolm had brought. What's that? A coat, Malcolm said. Gloves. Socks. If you want them. If not, they'll go to someone else. George stared at the bag, then at Malcolm. Finally, he said, My hands get cold. Malcolm nodded. Then take them. George reached for the bag slowly, not with gratitude spilling out in dramatic words, but with a quiet acceptance that felt more honest. For a while, they sat in silence, two men from different worlds sharing the same cheap coffee smell. Then George said, You know what else matters? Malcolm leaned forward slightly. What? George's eyes sharpened, voice low. Don't let this be the last time you care. Malcolm nodded. It won't be. George studied him, then looked away toward the crowded room. We'll see, he said. And that was the truth. Redemption wasn't a speech, and it wasn't one dramatic moment. It was what came next, and next, and next again, when no one clapped, when no one filmed it, when it stopped being new. Malcolm left the community center with no feeling of triumph. He left with a weight, but it was the kind of weight that could keep a person honest if they carried it right. The next morning, the cafe opened as usual. The bell jingled. Espresso hissed. People ordered their oat milk lattes and typed on their laptops. But outside, the bench was clean and taped to the inside of the front window, where anyone walking by could see, was a sign written in simple black letters. We treat everyone with respect. No exceptions. Some customers read it and nodded. Some frowned. Some didn't notice. But one person stopped. George stood across the street, coat warmer now, gloves on his hands. He looked at the sign, then at the bench. He didn't cross. Not yet. He simply watched. Inside, Madison wiped down tables with a seriousness she hadn't had before. Chris was absent. Tyler was gone. And Malcolm, behind the counter for the first time in years, made coffee himself, hands steady, eyes paying attention. He looked out the window and saw George. He didn't wave like it was a performance. He simply nodded, small and respectful, as if saying, "I see you." George stared back for a moment. Then slowly he nodded too. Not forgiveness, not a neat ending, just recognition, quiet, human, and real. And for the first time in a long time, the bench outside the cafe wasn't a symbol of who didn't belong. It was just a bench, a place to sit, a place where maybe kindness could become ordinary again.